Alice Cooper loved rock music so much that he hated anything that got in the way of him and his craft.
He said, don't talk politics, please. It's just rock and roll. I mean, I hate politics.
But sometimes this politics was brought about by other rock stars, so by extension he held grudges against them. And with a man so dedicated to his craft, it never took a lot to make Cooper furious. At age 77, he's revealed 8 artists that made his blood boil with hatred. Starting our list at number 8 is a rock artist that decided to hit Cooper where it hit the most, Dee Snider. Alice Cooper and Dee Snider came from parallel corners of rock, outrageous stage shows, shock value, theatricality. But politically, they diverged sharply. Snider long embraced using his platform for causes. Cooper often said he preferred that rock be an escape, not a pulpit. Cooper repeatedly expressed discomfort with mixing rock and politics. He said he kept his political opinions to himself and viewed musicians telling fans how to vote as an abuse of power because you're telling your fans not to think for themselves. He believed rock and roll was about freedom, not about persuasion or political messaging. Dee Snider, by contrast, had a history of political involvement and outspoken commentary, testifying before Congress about censorship, defending rock's right to offend, challenging politicians and norms. The flashpoint came when Cooper's older comments resurfaced, particularly his 2018 interview with The Guardian, in which he had said that while he believed in humanitarian causes, he saw the act of urging fans how to vote as overreach. Snider reacted sharply. He said he was hugely disappointed in Cooper over calling such advocacy an abuse of power. Snider reminded people that he himself had taken stands that were unpopular, had testified under political pressure, and had assumed risk to defend free expression. Snider particularly said this: "Fair enough, but Cooper told me he wouldn't have testified at the Senate hearings on censorship either. I did, and I got a lot of heat for it at the time. It may not have been the best thing to do for my career, but sometimes you have to take a stand." Snider was trying to put a villain label on him, and that's what drove him nuts. Normally, Cooper was quite the pacifist, but if he hated anything more than politics, it was someone trying to drag his name in the mud because of it. Artist number 7 is someone Cooper never thought he'd had ill feelings for, and that's Dennis Dunamary. They had started as kids who wanted to shock the world. They had built a machine of riffs, spectacle, and teenage menace that turned into something monstrous and unstoppable. When Dennis Dunaway met Alice Cooper, Cooper hadn't yet adopted that persona. He was still Vince Fournier, class clown and athlete at Cortez High School on the northern edge of Phoenix. They bonded in Mrs. Sloane's art class over their interest in Salvador Dali and René Magritte, and shared their first on-stage experience at a Cortez talent show, spoofing the Beatles for their classmates with another future member of the Alice Cooper band, guitarist Glenn Buxton. Vincent Fournier, Michael Bruce, Neil Smith, and Dennis Dunaway had become the Alice Cooper Group, and together they had written anthems that defined an era. But what looked like brotherhood on stage had been fraying off stage for years. And suddenly, a thin line separated love and hate. The first cracks were never about music alone. Success had brought money, exhaustion, and a stage show that demanded more danger than any of them had bargained for. By the time they finished recording Muscle of Love in 1973, the band had been moving at a frantic pace for years, and they had started to pay the price. Substance problems crept in, health problems crept in, egos crept in. The chemistry that had made them brilliant had begun to corrode. It truly started when their manager and producer Bob Ezrin took over creative decision-making for Alice Cooper. For Alice, this was a good thing because this meant that more time to focus on the music. But to Dennis, it didn't sit right with him. What seemed like a minor and insignificant change blew out of proportion and caused a creative rift between band members. Alice, seeing that Dennis and other band members weren't fully committed to things, started drinking heavily to cope. And in his alcoholism, his emotions were amplified. What felt like a slight misunderstanding turned to a grudge, but not one that would last forever. But by the time they got back, the damage from their absence in each other's lives was starting the show. The record label pulled out funding from their project and shows, and Alice Cooper, who was known as a singer with a crew, wasn't allowed to perform as a solo act. When Dennis learned that Cooper had perhaps moved on past the band, he also looked elsewhere for greener pastures. Together with former bandmates of Alice Cooper, Dennis formed the billion-dollar Babies rock band, but with just one body of work ever released, the band didn't stay for long. Although Dennis Dunamary had a few other gigs here and there, he did circle back to performing again with Alice Cooper, Although the hate did die down, it did once exist and it was burning strongly. Artist number 6 is Frank Zappa. He and Alice Cooper were once the furthest thing from adversaries. In fact, they started off as business partners. Zappa had just created record labels, Straight Records and Bizarre Records. But there was something his labels were missing, and that's a superstar. Little did Zappa know that he would find his dream artist at a party in Los Angeles. A few bands had performed before, but when Alice Cooper and his crew took the stage, they made the party their own. They were all on acid, we looked like we'd just come up out of the ground, and we didn't mind a little violence on stage. But it wasn't the type of performance that had fans cheering, it had them leaving. Not because Alice Cooper played terribly, but his style was so powerful and raw that they just weren't ready for it. And while partygoers cleared the venue, Frank Zappa, Shep Gordon and another executive stayed because Zappa had found just what he was looking for. Alice Cooper was signed to Straight Records, and Frank Zappa started working to help the young rock artist put bodies of work out. It seemed like the perfect combo. Alice, a young and promising music talent, and Frank Zappa, a well-seasoned musical artist who could do with a protege. Zappa was also the best guitar player I've ever seen. I saw him play one night at a club with Hendrix. Frank got up and did an imitation of him. I'm looking at Hendrix and his mouth was open. But what would seem like the start of a flourishing music business partnership would soon turn out to be a nightmare. Alice's first body of work was Pretty's For You, but he was barely for Alice when he was writing it. He pushed production work over to keyboardist Ian Underwood. But Zappa didn't just abandon his role as a mentor and producer, he made Cooper's life a whole lot harder. Once Alice Cooper's band finally locked in on the sound they wanted, dark, theatrical, and unapologetically weird, they were ready to record. But Frank Zappa had other plans. He looked at them and said, "You've got 1 week, just 7 days to make an entire album." From putting a strain on Cooper's creativity to sabotaging projects, Zappa was not the man that Cooper initially believed him to be. One time, Alice Cooper's camp and Zappa's business team went head-to-head in court over royalties. The result was devastating. Cooper lost millions of dollars and the rights to their early work. Everything recorded before Billion Dollar Babies in 1973 disappeared right before their eyes. Yet despite all this, Alice Cooper knew that it would be wise to keep his true feelings to himself. Zappa was a legend in the game. Speaking against him was enough to end his career, so Cooper resorted to just singing praises about him while keeping his true feelings to himself. Artist number 5, or should I say artists, is Kasabian, the then a young British rock band from Leicester. They formed in 1997, combining indie rock, electronica, and big stadium-ready hooks. As they grew, they played more international festivals, rubbing shoulders with older, established acts. Alice Cooper by then was decades into his career. Cooper and Kasabian often shared the same event bills. That's how they landed in the same city at the same time in Romania in 2007 at a rock music festival called Festival in Bucharest. It would be the site of the first time Cooper would pick a fight with not just an artist, but an entire band. This feud wasn't one of music. It was of politics and liquor, two things bound to rile up grown men. Kasabian members were reportedly drunk and started making political remarks, specifically about Americans and the Iraq War. They said things like, "Americans, if it weren't for you, we wouldn't be in this war." That's when Cooper interjected with, "Don't try to talk politics, please. It's just rock and roll. I mean, I hate politics." To Kasabian, this felt like an invitation to get real rowdy. The first person they pushed was Chuck, Alice's bass player, and that was something that Cooper was not going to let it fly. He joined in the scuffle until surrounding bystanders in the bar intervened. After it cooled down, Cooper made clear there were no lasting grudges. He said it was about alcohol and politics getting mixed, which is dangerous when tempers are already warm. Cooper said he liked Kasabian and thought they were great. He said because nobody got knocked out, it was okay. Cooper knew that what had transpired only did so because of alcohol, and as angry as he was, he did become quite hateful of the entire Kasabian band, but he couldn't stay mad at them forever. As a matter of fact, Cooper said he liked Kasabian, though they were great. He said because nobody got knocked out, it was okay. There was no lawsuit, no long-standing feud with Kasabian, as far as the public record shows. The incident remained something Cooper would recall in interviews as a moment of tension, but also as a reminder not to let politics invade rock spaces. Artist number 4 is the ever-famous John Lennon. They met on the jagged, electric edges of late 60s rock and then again in the early 70s. Both men arrived at fame from opposite directions. John Lennon had become a world figure as a Beatle, then he had turned his fame toward brutal honesty and political agitation with solo work. Alice Cooper had built his reputation from small club chaos into theatrical shock rock that made audiences either howl or riot. Their worlds overlapped at big events and small bars, and the meetings that followed did not become headlines for violence or lawsuits, but instead became the kind of backstage tales that aged into myth. But they weren't myths of animosity or rivalry, but that of friendship and brotherly love. Their first seismic intersection happened at the 1969 Toronto rock and roll revival. Lennon, newly liberated from the Beatles grind, had shown up unexpectedly and had played with the Plastic Ono Band. Alice Cooper's band, then Raw and Anarchic, had also stormed the stage and left an impression on anyone who saw them. Although music made them cross paths, it wasn't what made them bond closer. Alcohol did that. That's right, the same thing that had Cooper ready to take off Kasabian's head was what had turned this British rock legend to a brother. Cooper was the founder of Hollywood Vampires, a drinking club for celebrities based in Los Angeles. Amongst frequent visitors, there was Ringo Starr and John Legend himself, who always stopped by. Anytime he was on the West Coast. Whenever Lennon was in town, Cooper remembered, things got heated. Men at the bar would line up, drinks in hand. John was great, Cooper told the BBC. You had all these guys that would just like to drink. And Harry and John, after 5 or 6 drinks, it was one of those things. I'd have to sit between them. They delighted in verbal duels. Cooper recalled how even over trivial truths, Lennon and Nilsson would spar. If John said black, Harry would say white. If Harry said Republican, John would say Democrat. They'd do it just for the fight. And Cooper's role was peacekeeper, trying to calm the sparks. But all that did was put him in the crosshairs of John's. But Lennon was relentless. He pushed Cooper to adopt the political mantle, to see music not just as spectacle, but activism. He urged Cooper to use his platform for change. Cooper said no, flat out. John, you were trying to save the world, Cooper remembered telling him. I'm just trying to entertain them. At number 3, we have Blackie Lawless. Alice Cooper had always stood as a sort of king in the shock rock throne room. With guillotines, boa constrictors, grotesque images, theatrical horror, he forged the blueprint. Then came others, inspired or influenced, who borrowed bits of that theater. Among them was Blackie Lawless of Wasp, a band whose visuals were louder, rawer, more metal-tinged, and arguably more extreme, but still tracing a lineage back to Alice Cooper's innovations. From the beginning, this proximity drew attention, sometimes admiration, sometimes criticism, and often comparison. Lawless himself admitted that Alice Cooper's performances had been formative. He saw Cooper's Love It to Death tour show when he was young and was struck. He said that show was like a religious experience. Cooper haunted his imagination, something he couldn't stop replaying in his head. The spectacle, the energy, the shock, it all stuck. That admiration was real, but admiration often carries the weight of expectation. From Alice's side, there were interviews where he said that what Lawless was doing was derivative rather than original. In one significant interview, Alice said, "Look at Blackie, it's so unoriginal. He's saying everything I used to say in the 70s. He accused Lawless of copying not in spirit but in specifics, going so far as to say word for word in certain routines. The implication was harsh, that Lawless had borrowed heavily from Cooper's style without giving credit or creating distinct identity. Lawless, in turn, responded in interviews by saying that Cooper had never given due credit to the original band when Cooper moved on to solo work like Welcome to My Nightmare. Lawless claimed that Cooper's failure to more fully acknowledge the group's collaborative energy hurt him. Lawless said Cooper got really angry with him over this. He said, "I never gave him credit, and the reason I never gave him credit is because I was angry with him." Lawless felt that the band dynamics Cooper left behind mattered, that the energy of a full stage show with multiple members was something greater and more communal than any solo act. Alice Cooper, for his part, defended the idea of originality and competition. He said, "I still shock in different ways." He described the character Alice as a villainous entity, one carried through time, and spoke of how he believed he could still erase any memory that anybody had out there before, meaning in performance he wanted to stand out. In that same interview where he criticized Lawless, Alice said that when he went on stage, he expected the audience to forget what else had come before, implying that others were still living in Alice Cooper's shadow. Artist number 2 is the infamous Marilyn Manson. They had been separated by a generation but drawn from the same well. Marilyn Manson had taken the language of shock and turned it into theology. He dressed like a nightmare and sang like an indictment. From Antichrist superstar onward, he framed himself as a provocateur of sacred things, deploying biblical imagery, carnival grotesques, and an identification with Lucifer and social outcasts to force his audience to ask why the church, the state, and mass culture commanded obedience. Alice Cooper had been a pioneer of a similar kind of theatricality. He had sold blood and guillotines as spectacle, but his life had moved in a direction that would surprise many. He had been raised in church. He had walked away when rock took him into addiction and chaos, and then later, he had returned to faith and became a public Christian figure. That conversion did not erase his taste for drama. Instead, it created a collision of worlds. Where Manson used Christian symbols as instruments of provocation and rebellion, Cooper had learned to treat the same symbols as sources of meaning and salvation. That difference was not merely stylistic. It mattered. It changed how each of them read the other. The imagery he portrayed didn't sit right with Alice Cooper, and he borderline hated it. But he didn't feel the type of hate that makes somebody hold a serious grudge. It was the type that wanted better for him. When journalists asked Alice Cooper about the accusations, he did something noteworthy. He said that in his friendship, and in the time he had spent around Manson, he had not noticed a violent streak. In an interview, Cooper told NME, and quote, "It's funny about Marilyn in that I know Marilyn. When we toured together, we got along very well. I never noticed that streak in him, if it's there. I always believe in the word. Still, allegations are still allegations. He did not absolve a person who was accused. He did not say that the allegations were false. He offered what he knew from personal experience, which was limited. That careful, measured response read to some as a defense. To others, it read as the wary voice of an older rocker who would not pile on without knowing more. It was a human answer in a media moment that demanded judgment. At number 1, we have Gene Simmons, born Chimwitz, co-founded KISS. He was the ultimate rock entrepreneur. Makeup, merchandising, branding, bombast. KISS was more than a band. It was a rock machine built on larger-than-life illusions, merchandising, stagecraft, and controversy. Simmons was never shy about discussing the business side of rock. Their careers paralleled the rise and fall of rock's mainstream dominance. Alice Cooper had been an outlaw in the 70s, then mainstream, then relic and revivalist. Gene Simmons had ridden the wave of glam and spectacle, and always looked for the next way to monetize the image. Gene Simmons didn't quietly murmur this idea. He made it bold, blunt, and repeated. He claimed that rock was dead, not because of musical creativity, but because the financial and cultural infrastructure that once supported it had collapsed. He blamed young fans, streaming economics, lack of investment in new talent. He said that modern bands hadn't built the epic, exciting, glamorous spectacle that earlier rock acts had done. He argued that rock had been murdered. In a podcast, he stated this:
"Been murdered, all right. Not by outside forces, foreign powers. We killed rock and roll."
Gene Simmons went on to defend his claims and even double down, saying, "Who are the new Beatles?" A rhetorical question which implied that the era of when rock music thrived is in the past. And now what exists is just remnants of a once glorious style of sound. Gene Simmons also lamented on how youngsters idolize pop stars and hip-hop artists, and true rock legends are almost unrecognizable to younger audiences. And these comments riled up Alice Cooper. The fact that Gene would use numbers, money, and sales as a metric for determining if a genre was good enough or not broke his heart. He fired back in an interview with LA Weekly, stating, "Gene Simmons said rock is dead, but I think he was talking financially. I think there are kids in garages right now learning Guns N' Roses, learning Aerosmith, learning Alice, learning Ozzy. Young 16-year-old kids rocking, just rocking." And Alice Cooper wasn't just being dogmatic in his defense of the genre and industry. He had actual reason to believe that rock music was anything but dead. Being the judge of the rock competition No Cover has given Cooper the privilege to have a peek of young and upcoming rock talents. And from what he's laid his eyes on, nobody can ever convince him that rock is dead. There you have it, 8 artists that Alice Cooper hated. Who do you think Alice Cooper had the best reason to hate, and which artists was he being a jerk towards? We want to know your thoughts in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and like this video for more content like this.